welcome to Cloud Cadet, Episode 7 by LinuxAcademy.com. My name is Anthony. I'm the founder of Linux Academy. And today we have Sander and Christoph here with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about serverless architectures. And Christoph, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Christoph Limpelaer. I'm an instructor at LinuxAcademy.com, and I teach mostly Amazon Web Services concepts. So I've done work with Lambda and DynamoDB and some of those serverless concepts, which is why we're on this episode today to talk a little bit more about that. And I'll let Sander explain a little bit more about that and who he is as well.
Okay, I'm Sander. I'm currently co-founder of Teletext.io, which is a content management service based on JavaScript, and it's entirely serverless, as Christoph said. My background is in several startups. I was involved with previously with Album Printer, Peacher.com, and currently also CTO at MyTomorrows.com, which is a healthcare startup.
So Sander, when we say serverless architecture, what does that really mean? Are there really no servers being used, or how does that work?
Well, it's of course really a matter of definition, but we define it as the absence of any operating system that we need to maintain ourselves. So of course, I know that probably, although nobody knows for sure, that there's even in the serverless services that we use, there's in some way servers involved and maybe even operating systems. But the good part is we don't know anything about that. And that's wonderful, because then I don't have to worry about it either.
It kind of reminds me of the whole cloud concept when people started using that term and thinking, okay, if I plug my data into this folder, it's going into the cloud and I don't have to worry about it. It's very similar to me when we talk about something like Lambda, where you plug in a function into Lambda and then it will execute whenever something happens. And you don't have to manage it like you were just saying. It's just kind of like a black box that's promised to work as long as it's properly configured.
Well, I would say that the serverless architecture is basically what cloud computing was actually meant to be. So, for example, if you look at Google's cloud engine, it sort of already works kind of serverless, right? It's just something you just push code to and then it executes it, but you don't really have to worry about the surrounding operating system in any case. However, I think, but that's merely guessing, that Amazon used the notion of cloud server instances to not get too far away from what people previously considered as their normal programming environment. So I think, like EC2, and the way that it was developed was basically winning from the other cloud providers, because it sort of reminds people of how they used to work with servers and operating systems before. So the step to actually start using cloud computing as opposed to Spiel is much smaller. Therefore, I think in the beginning, EC2 showed way more traction than other providers did. But I think, why would I want to have to worry about any operating system? I mean, it doesn't really make sense.
Do you think there is ever a time when it does make sense to stick to something like EC2 and having more control over the operating system? Or where do you draw the line between being able to use Lambda 100% and just part of the time to supplement EC2? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, the how we started, you said you read the article on high scalability, right? But probably people who are watching this, they didn't. So maybe I should explain how we started quickly. Essentially, Teletext.io is a little hobby project that got a little bit out of hand, in which we tried to solve one of their own problems that we had. In multiple startups, we always had, we started building like mad, basically, to deliver a project. And then we never worried about putting the project in a content management system or anything. So at some point, we would discover that now we have a working product, but we couldn't really change any text without actually doing a new deployment of the code, which is fine until the moment where a manager gets to your desk and asks you, can you please change this string, please, because there's a typo, or I want to have a different language, or something like that. And then the programmers would have to change that, the manager would have to wait for 2 weeks in the deployment cycle or whatever, and then, it's a problem because developers are expensive, managers are impatient, so that doesn't really work. So we started looking for a service that could do this for us, like a plugin kind of SaaS kind of thing. But we couldn't find it. So at some point we just said, okay, let's just build it ourselves. So we started working at this, and exactly at that time, Amazon launched Lambda. And other things that happened were that Google launched Material Design Lite. And of course, if you just start a hobby project to scratch your own itch, basically, then you choose the coolest technology around. So we figured we would instigate the rule that we weren't allowed to use servers. And we're just the kind of people who tend to operate well under the circumstances of limitation. So that was our limitation. We basically said no operating systems, none whatsoever. Also, it was a matter of money, of course, because since you don't pay for Lambda if you don't use it, there's no idle cost involved. And even with EC2, there's like the minimum setup would be like 2 machines in a clustered situation or something. And even if it was small ones, you still have to pay, which I didn't want because it was just a hobby project, and I have tens of those. And so, I mean, they would strip me naked if I would continue at this pace. So, yeah, we decided to use the cheapest option.
So instead of paying hourly for EC2 instances, depending on the instance type, how much memory it has, virtual CPUs, etc., Lambda has a model where you're only paying for how long the function took to execute and how much memory it used, how many times it's called.
Exactly.
So like you say, it's really only on demand that you're priced for it, which is a different model entirely.
We learned from previous startups, because even when Teletext started to become a company, we learned from experience that one of the most important things if you launch a product that you're still testing and you're not making any money with, most important things is that it's cheap. The cheap, that you have a much longer runway, and you can keep up with the competition for much longer. I mean, the quickest way to let your startup fail is to spend too much money, right? Because that will be very soon. So that was sort of a coincidence. But at first we basically started playing with this because it was cool, and because the things we wanted to do actually fit very well with the model. Because Teletext, in the essence, is just an API with very simple operations. It's basically reading, writing content, maybe some authentication stuff, and that's about it, which is easy to build into a Lambda situation with a database underneath it like DynamoDB. If I may have chosen, for example, an EC2 clustered situation if, for example, I would need to use a lot of software that ties into operating systems or is available for operating systems, like really big open source projects that otherwise could not be ported to Lambda. Then I would maybe opt for EC2. Also what I'm using. So.
And also Lambda right now is only supporting Python, Node.js, and Java. And if for some reason you need to use another language, then that's not going to work for the time being. I don't know if they have any plans to change that. Who knows? But I guess we'll have to see.
I don't know.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about the other parts of your stack? Because you're not just using Lambda, you're also using other services on Amazon. What are those services?
Yeah, the setup is actually really simple. I mean, the dynamic parts are dealt with by the API gateway, which has a nice API option, of course. It's pretty much a plug-and-play API generator that Amazon built for us. You can just define operations and basically configure an entire API that you can tie into services that run in the background and basically do the work. In our case, that's Lambda. And the Lambda functions, they read and write their data into DynamoDB, which we also consider to be serverless because there's no operating system we have to worry about. Also, I think, but that's just personal, I think DynamoDB is sort of like a, I mean, I was an early adapter of SimpleDB with Teacher.com, which we also thought was really cool. But DynamoDB in itself is sort of like a magical engine, because all these huge companies use it, like Amazon itself, and I believe even Netflix is built on top of it.
They do.
And we reckon that if we want to start a little startup, that the free tier would be so huge, because it's meant for such big companies, that we would actually never ever have to pay. And maybe if we did and it would go down, nobody would actually blame us, because they would be worried about Netflix first, because if you can't watch TV, that's a much bigger problem than whatever we could come up with. So so it feels really safe. Well, if you Teletext is in the essence is like a content management service, right? So what you can do is you can edit your content and then push it to the central service, and you can publish it to your own website in live mode. And the publishing gets done by Lambda as well. So there's a hook in the API that says publish my content. And when you do that, then a Lambda function will get out the appropriate draft content and publish it as flat files into S3. So basically, we extract it from the database, where it's still arguably part of some system with moving parts, and then we put it in S3, which is static file host based on JSON files in this case, which we then deliver through a CDN, which is CloudFront. So for the publication part, there's not just no servers, but there's also no, I like to think of it as moving parts. So there's no systems actually that do anything apart from deliver content. So that means that even if our entire system would crash and burn, that the published content would still be available because it's simply there in the bucket and delivered to the world by the CDN. So that's a fairly simple publication mechanism, which is also super stable and serverless.
Are you actually storing the data, like the text, inside of DynamoDB, or are you storing a reference to the text in S3 in DynamoDB?
Good question. We store the actual drafts in DynamoDB. So because there's a limit to the size of stuff you can put in DynamoDB, but it's for text it's still quite large, and we chunk it up if necessary.
Okay, and then you store the flat JSON file in S3 and you deliver it that way through CloudFront, which is their CDN.
Yes.
I see. And then going back to the API gateway itself, so is all communication with everything behind API gateway going through the API gateway? So you can authenticate the request through API gateway, you can make sure everything's routed properly. Does everything go through API gateway?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Cognito before.
Yes.
Which we use for authentication. We use the JavaScript API that Amazon made for connecting to Google login with the Google account. So essentially using the security features of Google, and then through the API gateway in Cognito, we authenticate using that Google ID. So all the hard stuff has been built by Google and Amazon, and we don't really have to think about that. I must say that when we started to build this, and that's like last summer, the Cognito stuff wasn't yet ready yet, but the Amazon people was actually one guy who was responsible for building this stuff, and he was really responsive and helped us, and even built some stuff specifically for us. So that was really great. I mean, that's of course the disadvantage if you build with like really new stuff, then you may bump into things that are not ready yet for production. But in the end, it worked out well.
And this is something with Amazon too, is the speed at which they iterate and modify services is really crazy sometimes, because, like you said, you worked on this last summer, you said?
Yeah.
And it was already in an infancy stage, but now if you look back at Cognito, it's pretty well established. I mean, you can plug it in with your mobile hub, your mobile applications. I know you can also even have it where, for example, if you have a mobile game, users can start playing the game without even being authenticated, and then once they reach the end of a level, you could say, hey, you need to log in to access the other levels, and instead of having them create an account and lose all that progress, Cognito keeps track of it, and once they do sign in and register and sign back in, then they still have that progress, so they haven't lost any of it. So when you really think about trying to implement something like that, that's a lot of work.
That's impressive, yeah.
Yeah. But they make it really easy, or seem very easy. And then you can just plug it into API gateway, like you were saying, to authenticate those requests. So you could have an admin panel or something like that, or different levels of users, I assume, like an editor or an administrator. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we haven't really implemented this, but we could do that. We're planning on doing that, though, but that's currently in the working. We recently became part of the Rockstar Incubator program in Amsterdam. Since last week, actually, so that's really nice. It's technically our first investment, and now that means that while this was so far a hobby project that we were working on in weekends, now officially has become a company, because now one guy is working on it full time, which is really awesome.
Nice,
Congratulations on that.
congratulations.
That's quite an accomplishment.
Well, it's to be quite honest, it's all a lot of coincidental things. I mean, we started the company as to fix a problem. Then we wrote this article on high scalability, while we only had a few customers, and that was the article was picked up by an amazing amount of other internet papers like Network World and CIO.com, and some Russian folks and Le Monde Informatique in France, and even some Chinese people.
Well, even the CTO of Amazon, I saw he wrote about it on LinkedIn. That was impressive.
Yeah, he'd been tweeting about it also like a million times, so that was really that really helped. Yeah, he was. But he's very he's a well-known figure in the startup scene in Amsterdam, particularly. He's a Dutch guy, and he's very interested in anything to do with Amazon, of course, but especially if it's made by Dutch people, because we tend to see him every now and then when he's around. So,
yeah, and his name is Werner Vogels, for if anyone's wondering who we're talking about right now, but CTO of Amazon, or Amazon Web Services, I should say.
Yeah, he's really cool and a very smart guy as well. So, but it was we wrote this article. It resonated very well. It got us our first 500 to 600 customers, and then some person told me, okay, dude, you really have to be careful because now it's not a company, so you'll be personally liable if something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But so then we made it into an official company, and then that same day we saw on the internet somewhere, like, it's the last day to apply for the Web and Mobile Rockstar Incubator program. And we said, oh, well, that could be fun. And then we signed up, and here we go.
And so actually, since you did get that influx of traffic from all that promotion, you were able to test to see if there were any problems with your philosophy behind having it all serverless. Did you run into any issues, like latency issues or something going down? How did that work?
No. Well, nothing actually went wrong. It was pretty much as we expected, but I must say we tested it on both teacher.com and mytomorrows.com, which are like essentially our own companies, to begin with for a few months. So we were quite certain about what we were doing. So that makes a big difference, of course.
Are you able to, or can you even share any of the stats that you had as far as number of users that came in, or?
We currently have between 500 and 600 customers, which is like essentially websites using our product. Our most interesting metrics is our cost of operation, which is super low, I can tell you. So,
is it?
Yeah, it's terribly low. I can do this, for years.
That's good. One of the interesting things about Lambda, especially as far as performance and latencies go, is I noticed that, and I've been reading a little bit about it as well to try and understand why this is going on, but I've noticed that if you have a function, whether it's a Node.js or Python function, if you don't have anyone that uses the function for a while, let's say 15-20 minutes, there's a little bit more of latency when someone tries to access it the first time. But once it's been accessed, if you access it again within a few seconds or even within a few minutes, the latency drops dramatically. And I think this has to do with the way they reuse containers, but have you been affected by that, or have you noticed that at all?
You're right, this happens. But the thing is, that's really based on how you build your service. Essentially, what we do is we make the separation between like the dynamic actions, like editing content and stuff, that uses directly the API and the lambdas. However, the distribution of the published content is entirely based on flat file distribution through the CDN. So there's no lambda involved. So the latency issues, if you would feel them, that it will be most dramatic, of course, in the live situation where the published content gets inserted in your website late or something. But that doesn't happen because there's no lambdas involved in that particular process. Of course, that's by design. And if the editing process has a slight delay, users don't really notice it because we basically save drafts automatically. You can also save them like by pressing a button, but this is all pretty much asynchronously dealt with in the client through JavaScript. So I think our customers don't notice.
And all you're doing is you're sending that information through the API gateway, like making an API call, and that API gateway routes it to the Lambda function, and then maybe you process the data a little bit, and you
Yeah.
write it to DynamoDB, right?
Exactly. And when the publication request comes in, we take it out of DynamoDB, we format it according to our scheme, and put it as JSON files in S3.
And you did that by design, like you were saying, to reduce latency, because you could very well also pull the data from DynamoDB with Lambda if you wanted to,
Yeah,
but in this case, you haven't done it that way.
Yeah,
Okay.
we could, but there's a couple of disadvantages. It means that somebody could break much easier, and also you're dependent on a few more services than we would be in this case. I'd rather use fewer services that have a better uptime record as well, because S3 is one of the most trustworthy services of Amazon. Because I think it's important that websites that are our customers don't have any downtime. It's one of our most important things. We really want to be bulletproof, and I think by pushing it to S3 asynchronously and then just serve it, there's not much that can break there, apart from the entire service. I mean, like if S3 goes down, yeah, okay, then we have an issue.
Right, there's a greater issue if that happens, for sure. A lot of people will have a bad day if that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you personally work on any of the Lambda functions yourself, or were you part of that development process? Because if you were, I do have a few questions regarding that, more specifically the versions and aliases. Did you do any work with that at all?
Well, I'm more of like a half-breed when it comes to technology. I used to do a lot of like on the client-side scripts for teletext, but not many on the lambdas itself. I do know that at least when we started, there wasn't a lot of versioning possible. So we used sort of several different, like I think the term you just used, aliases, right? So you use sort of different versions in parallel rather than have a sequential deployment procedure. I think that could be a problem in a large team. For example, here at My Tomorrows, where I'm currently at, I have a team of 6 developers, and if we want to apply the Lambda thing here, it would be harder because we have a very strict, deployment procedure where there's like different versions of the code involved. But with teletext, we don't really have that problem because we're essentially 2 guys building this stuff. So there's no really need for any complicated deployment features. I did read them, that there are some improvements there as well, but maybe you know more about that.
Well, I will say this, and the Lambda development process is actually quite nice. I enjoyed it a lot because first of all, you can write the functions on your local machine itself, and then you can usually test those functions depending on if it's Python or Node.js. You can get some dependencies or packages and use those to actually test the function on your local machine before you even deploy it to Amazon. And that way you can see if there's a bug or if it just doesn't behave the way you expected it to. And then once that's done, you can actually publish it to Lambda or to Amazon Web Services, and you can create versions. So like you were saying, you could have the current version with an alias pointing to it, which is being used in production, and you know that one works 100%, but you wanted to add a new feature to it. So you can push a new version, and then you can point that alias to the new version, and if it doesn't work or if it has any issues, then you can point it back to the previous version, and that way you don't have any issues that way. Or you could even have different stages, like you could have a development stages or a production stage where you were testing the version in the production stage at first, make sure there aren't any issues, and if there aren't any issues, then you can promote it to that production stage, which is very nice, and I think that's a relatively new feature that I'm really glad they implemented because, like you were saying, when you have 2 people, it may not be that big of a deal, but if you have a bigger team, you could have a lot of people stepping on each other's toes for sure.
Yeah, in our case here, that would most certainly lead to problems.
Right.
Yeah, the simple case of teletext, that it's not such a big deal. Also, what's interesting is that you mentioned the Python and the Java versions. When we started, we didn't even have them, so we developed everything in Node.
Oh wow, okay.
Simply wasn't available at that time.
And that was just last summer, like you were saying. I mean, that was not even a year ago, right?
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I say that Amazon just iterates so quickly. Sometimes it's mind-blowing. In fact, sometimes we'll work on a course, and I'll say, I'll have a lecture saying something, and right before I publish it, I'll see an update, and I'll have to go back and fix it because they've modified that. So you really have to stay on your toes when you're working with Amazon Web Services, especially teaching it.
You better timestamp your blog very well. That's so everybody can see. This is already 2 weeks old. It may be stale.
All right. Well, we have to go back and edit it. That's why we have people full time, so we have the ability and capacity to do that. But it's it's a lot of fun. Well, anyway.
If you have more technical questions, I would say it's best to ask them to my co-founder. He's Marcel. He's a super technical guy, but deeper than the level you've just seen. For example, the version in question, I'm afraid I cannot get. But
right. Well, I think we still covered a lot of really useful information. So I really appreciate your time, Sander. Do you have anything else that you wanted to mention, or Anthony, any questions you had?
No, I think this overview was really fantastic, seeing how you glue it together and kind of the architecture for our students and even other listeners of the Cloud Cadet podcast can listen to. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this morning.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's the only thing I can think of to add to the story is maybe that we are currently working on tying a lot of external services into our system. For example, like automated translations and that kind of stuff, which we also have Lambda take care of, like the services that on demand make use of external APIs and code that basically approaches an external service and pulls in translated versions of existing content. So all that stuff you can also do in Lambda. So,
well, hopefully you'll write a post about that, and that way we can go back and read through it and see how that works. I'm really interested in seeing how that works.
Well, maybe we could do it on your blog. I mean, I don't know if you have any publication availability there, but I'll be very happy to.
That would actually be fantastic. We'd love to take you up on that offer. And then, it seems like what's happening is your startup is continuing to grow, and you're continuing to work on these very cool serverless architecture. So, we love to have you on again in the future and see what's changed for you. And as you start hitting, larger scale as you are every single day, any other additional capacity or issues that you've ran into. So this is a really interesting story.
Well, thanks for your kind words. I hope to see you.
Absolutely, thank you.
And I will add this before we close out. If you found any of this interesting at all and you want to learn more about it, we do have a Lambda deep dive course on linuxacademy.com where we have hands-on lectures. In fact, I made those lectures myself, and we do have hands-on labs as well where you can go in and you can actually practice what you're learning in the videos itself. So if you have any interest in that at all, please check it out. It's at linuxacademy.com.
Well, Christoph and Sander, thank you for your time. It was, again, very great to hear how you guys are doing. And if you ever need anything, please feel free to let us know. And thanks for taking the time this morning.
Thank you.